recording. So welcome everybody to Dyslexia RX March webinar event. We are very excited that this week's webinar event is free and open to everybody. Kelli Fetter is an occupational therapist with Handwriting Solutions, and she is our guest speaker this week. She's going to be speaking about all things dysgraphia. And so, Kelli, I'm going to turn it over to you, and you just let me know when to move the slides forward, okay?
Okay, great. Awesome. So I'm assuming you're probably here because you want to learn more about dysgraphia. And, the diagnoses that not a lot of people know about.
Kelli?
Yes.
Your voice is cutting in and out.
Okay. Let's see. I wonder, is that better?
That's very clear, yes.
Very clear. Okay, great. So, dysgraphia is one of those kind of the unknown of all of the learning disabilities. And so, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that is and stuff, but I'm happy that you all are here and wanting to learn more about it. And I think it's going to really benefit if you're a teacher or a parent, just really benefiting these children. So as Penny said, I'm an occupational therapist, but really I don't practice OT right now. I am a handwriting specialist and an educational consultant. And so I work with families and children one-to-one. I'm also bringing on board and training more tutors so that we can reach even more children virtually as well as in person in the Florida area. So, okay, Penny, you can go on. So first, I just kind of want to tell my story of how I ended up being a handwriting tutor. Why that, of all of the things that an occupational therapist could do. So really, it all started when my daughter received her diagnosis in first grade. So she's in fourth grade. And she has both dyslexia and dysgraphia. As an OT, I thought, okay, I know this handwriting piece. But dysgraphia is a whole different thing. And I just did not, it was all very new to me. It was all very new to know how to help her for both the dyslexia and the dysgraphia. And so really, I just kept seeing this gap of who helps these children. You've got your educational tutors and they're great at getting the reading piece, and who's doing the writing piece. And so that's really kind of what drove me to deep dive in all things dysgraphia, learning best practices, reading the research. And then, the business was born, and not all of my clients have dysgraphia, but many of them do. And so I'd love to hear in the chat what's your all story? Are you all parents? Are you all teachers? Does your child or student have dysgraphia, or do you suspect so? Kind of what brings you here this evening to hear.
We're waiting on our participants to go ahead and fill out the chat. Do you want me to take it to the next slide? Okay.
Thank you.
Sure thing.
So as the chat and feedback is coming in, I always just like to have that interaction and engagement, because I really want this presentation to be helpful for everybody.
So they are. Thank you very much, Kimberly, for letting us know. Yes, if you'll post everything in the Q&A. I apologize for that. So yes, go ahead and post anything of where you're from, kind of what brought you here today, and we will respond to the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. So as those are coming in, I'll kind of address those. So really our goals today, dysgraphia, I could spend a whole day talking to you all about this and how to help. But what I really just wanted to know to share with you all is to help you all better understand dysgraphia, to kind of know what signs and symptoms to look for, to really understand the impact that it can have on your child's education, which is really important, because again, it is beyond just your typical handwriting struggles, and it is beyond a lack of instruction. So looking at that broader impact on education. I also want you all to leave here with some strategies that you can use at home or at school if you're an educator. So just some little tips and tools and takeaways that you can apply right away. And then my third and final goal for today is just to help you all be advocates for your student or child, advocating for their accessibility at school. And so we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like, and that could be in the form of accommodations or modifications. And yeah, we'll talk more specifics. So dysgraphia defined, if you actually break down the word dysgraphia, the dys is Greek meaning impaired. So you have, dyslexia, impaired, and then graphia really means making letter forms by hand. So it's an impairment in making letter forms by hand. So it essentially is a disorder of writing ability, whereas dyslexia would be that impairment in the ability to read. And then the third of the umbrella of specific learning differences is dysgraphia, which is a impairment in math or number sense. So I just want to, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this because we can get lost in the weeds here, but I just wanted to share this with you all, because in the school system, you may not hear the word dyslexia used, and you might hear disorder of written expression. And essentially they're the same thing. So different organizations describe it differently. And really the biggest thing that we look at is what the ICD, which is the classification of diagnoses, what they're saying is it is a disorder of written expression. So dysgraphia kind of falls in with that. So sometimes people say, oh, well, dysgraphia is the physical, and the disorder of expression is the cognitive piece of getting your thoughts on paper. Really, they're one and the same. Call it what you want. It's kind of the dependent, because either way, we're going to treat it similarly. So, but just know that if in your child's AP, you may need to say that they have a disorder of written expression, that specific learning disorder.
So Kimberly has a comment. It says, we're in Arizona. My son is 8, and we just found out he has dyslexia and dysgraphia at the end of last year through a dyslexia clinic. We homeschool. We are using Barton now. We have always used Handwriting Without Tears workbooks only. Now we will be using extra accessories from Handwriting Without Tears. You are certified Handwriting Without Tears, correct?
I am, yes. I am fully certified and have my training through their handwriting specialists. So I think they are, as I know, the only curriculum or company that gives a handwriting specialist certification. So yes, I'm trained in that, and it's an amazing program. And with that said, I also pull in from a few other programs to really meet that child where they are at. And I can talk a little bit about programming later, but I mean, that's for be on it and doing the Barton programming, which is, I believe, an Orton Gillingham based program for that phonological piece. So you're starting off strong. So, okay, you can go on to the next one. So the biggest question I think that I see, if you're hanging out on Facebook groups and, parents want to know, they post a picture of their child's handwriting and they say, does my child have dysgraphia? And I wish it was that easy, but it's not. But here are some just signs. If you start to notice multiple signs and several of these things, it's like red flag, red flag. So how do you know if your child might have dysgraphia? So yes, there could be some messy handwriting. Again, doesn't mean that's not a surefire sign of dysgraphia, but it often can be. Pain or fatigue with writing is definitely a sign. So they might cramp. They might just feel uncomfortable. I hear students complain of pain all the way, the palm of their hand, their wrist, even their forearm can feel painful. And really that's because of either an awkward grip or awkward wrist positioning. Usually it's some type of positioning problem. Poor formation, which leads to a bit of a messy handwriting. Or one way that I like to think about the formation is, do they draw their letters? So when you think about if you're writing a lowercase r and you do the little line and then you come back up and do the little curve. Well, they might do a little line and then they might draw a little curve, or they might put the little curve first and then, so they're drawing their letters versus fluently, automatically writing that letter. It's not smooth. They may have poor spacing issues. So all of the letters are either spread apart, so you can't read which word is which, or they're all crammed in together, which again leads to illegible writing. They might have poor line placement. So they have lots of floating letters, sinking letters underneath the line. It's just inconsistent a lot. There could be a slower rate of writing. So the writing process is very laborious and painful and not very fun. It can be very frustrating for this. They might have an awkward pencil grasp, which again leads to some pain and stuff too, but also it's almost like that grasp pattern just really never developed, when typically, by kindergarten, they should have a decent pencil grasp. They might struggle with spelling. Spelling is another piece that's a pretty good indicator of that written expression. And, spelling is one of the trickier things to address, because not only is it the written output, but it's a lot of that cognitive too, and that phonological piece pulling in from to kind of make that connection of input and output. They might have a hard time with syntax and grammar and punctuation. So their sentences are just maybe not making sense. They're leaving out punctuation. They're not capitalizing correctly, especially for their age. You really want to think about, is it appropriate for their age or their grade level? One of the biggest red flags that I see is that the child avoids writing. When we get to that point and they're showing that frustration with writing, that's when we know there's something going on. They, my daughter, before she was diagnosed and kind of in that early diagnosis period, crumpling up papers, ripping up papers, it was just so hard and so frustrating for her. So that's usually a clear indicator something is going on, whether it's dysgraphia or something else. And then difficulty getting their thoughts out on paper. So a lot of times these kids are just really bright and they have high verbal skills, so they can tell you amazing stories. But when it comes to writing, they might write a 3-word sentence. So you can definitely see the discrepancy there.
Hey, Kelly, can I add something? Just kind of an experience I had. So I'm also a college professor, and several years ago, we were interviewing new applicants for our program for the following year, and we had the applicants write an essay right there on the spot for us. They had to answer a question. And I was collecting the essays, and one of the applicants wrote one sentence, and I thought, she may not have had enough time, and this was not a timed event. She could have stayed all day and it would have been fine. And so I said, oh, go ahead. You're more than welcome to finish. And she said, no. And without even thinking, I said, really, it's okay. You can go ahead and finish. And then when I looked up, the horror on her face, and all of a sudden it just clicked for me. She had great grades. She obviously was accepted to the second part of the application process with an interview, but she could not get words on paper from a handwriting perspective. I'm sure she did great on computer. So the one thing I really just want to share with our audience here is children that have these issues grow up to be adults with these issues. And it is so important not to fall into, oh, they'll grow out of it, they just need more practice, oh, they're lazy. I mean, there's definitely some serious concerns that should be addressed, and we can certainly address that through proper handwriting instruction. And so what you were just saying just kind of spoke to me, and it, about how that could just follow you throughout the lifespan.
I'm so glad you shared that, because yes, absolutely. And actually, of all of the learning disabilities, this is the one that slips through the cracks, the one that we don't notice, because we think, I just assessed a child this morning that, they were like, we think it might be psychological. We think it might be, he's just, and I'm like, but it could also be, so I think it is so important to see that whole child, and yes, and preparing them. And the way I always kind of approach it too is like, I'm not trying to create the most beautiful penmanship. We're trying to create functional writers that can express themselves. And like you said, obviously that task for that college student was beyond her, but given the right tools, I'm sure she would.
Heartbreaking.
Yeah. So I think that just speaks volumes to how important it is to early remediation, and then some accommodation, accessibility, which we'll be talking about. So, slide. What I was thinking. Oh, can you go?
I don't know how that happened. Sorry.
No, that's okay. And I was thinking, well, I didn't really address the whole who diagnosis, because that's another piece of it too. So I'll real quick, again, I don't want to spend a ton of time on this, but OTs cannot diagnose. We can provide our report and our assessment, and that can have so much power for that diagnosis. So I say we're a part of the team, but a neuropsychologist or an educational psychologist will be the one to make diagnosis. So we have the diagnosis. So now what? My two go-to resources for tackling dysgraphia head on is getting an educational tutor on board. So somebody who's really experienced with dysgraphia, and they can assess and remediate any underlying spelling, reading, or phonological pieces that are impacting this. So grammar and syntax, and then that expression piece. And then an OT or handwriting specialist like me can dive into the motor pieces, assess and remediate fine motor skills, visual motor, ocular motor. We can look at letter, word, and sentence skills and building those up. We can look at that cognitive piece, the executive function. So I know that's a bit of a buzzword right now, and really that just means organization, planning, attention, all of those pieces that kids with dysgraphia can struggle with. So we can assess and remediate that. And then also that expression piece as well. And the beauty of having both of these for that child is that you're hitting all of it. You're hitting the big picture. Leaving one piece out really just hinders the child. Their growth is not going to be as fast and as good as the growth of having both on board. So I think it's really good to talk about that. And the key here is making sure that they are experienced with dysgraphia. So I'll be the first to say that not every OT is experienced with dysgraphia. So making sure that you ask those questions of that OT or handwriting tutor. And same thing with educational tutors as well. They're not all the same. So making sure that they have the experience, the training, the tools to be able to assess and remediate. So you all, I believe, are my first audience who's seeing the next two slides. So This is a dysgraphia framework that I created based on my experience as well as what the research is saying currently. So again, I could spend hours discussing this kind of thing, but really I just want to hone in on the key elements here. So in the center, you see that child accessing education and life. So as Penny alluded to, we're not just creating good handwriting for an 8-year-old. We're creating it for life because they're going to need these skills. I understand that technology is ever present in our world, but they're going to need these handwriting skills for the rest of their life, whether it's filling out college forms or job applications or just jotting down quick notes. It's just so valuable. And the research shows that we retain information better if it is written out by hand. Our learning is deeper when it's written out by hand, and our reading and our spelling is also improved through hand. So we have a child, and that's our goal that we want them to access. So we've got the problem and the barrier, which could be physical, cognitive, or visual. So those are kind of those areas that we really need to tackle. And how we will tackle that is through those types of interventions. So we remediate, which means we address the problem through skilled intervention. We can accommodate, and accommodate really means bringing in tools to the environment, changing the environment for the child. So I'll be talking about some low-tech and high-tech tools later on. And then modifying or modification. So that is actually changing the way, maybe at school, the way a paper is graded or an assignment is graded. So it's actually modifying the assignment or modifying the project for the child. And then finally, what intervention should be. And this is equally as important. I don't think that I could pick out one piece of this puzzle that is the most important. So I think it's really, valuable to understand that intervention should be individualized. So there's not a one size fits all approach for remediation or for accommodation or for modification. So what works for one child was not always going to work for another child. And we have to really dive in those assessments to learn about the child and figure out their strengths, which was the next point. Intervention should be strengths-based. So as much as we can, we bring in their interests. We build upon their strengths. So for my daughter, for example, her strength, she was a visual learner. Her visual skills were through as a first grader. Well, bingo. So you're seeing lots of visual supports because that's going to help her with her handwriting. So being able to use those strengths-based individualized approach. And then the other two pieces, explicit and systematic. So essentially what that means, explicit means it is direct. It is, we are instructing the student exactly how we want them to form the letter. We are demonstrating it for them. We're imitating it for them. They're copying it. It's not busy work, so to speak. It's not a bunch of tracing pages. So we are approaching it head on from that instruction standpoint. And then systematic means that we're doing our remediation in there's a system to it. So we aren't just going to start writing sentences on the first day. We're going to take a specific approach. We also, when talking about writing, we are going to teach certain letters together because that system is easier for the child. So when they learn a C, for example, they can take that C and turn it into a lowercase a, and then turn that into a lowercase g. So again, you're systematic, you're building on what they know. So that helps them feel successful. It builds neural pathways, and overall leads to better and faster progress. So I know this dysgraphia framework kind of looks very overwhelming, but I'm hoping to actually create a more in-depth about this as well. But I think that's a pretty good an overview of that. So the second graphic that, again, you all are my first audience I'm sharing this with, so I'm so excited. So it is kind of my thoughts on the foundational approach to dysgraphia. So I'm a visual person as well. So I think in graphics, and think in I think that this is a good type of, I don't want to say linear approach, but that foundation, that we build the foundation, there's building blocks to get to the top, which is that independence. So in starting at the bottom, then we're really looking at those physical and visual skills that they need. So the child needs to be able to have physical skills such as pencil grasp, posture, strength, motor planning. So that means an example of motor planning for handwriting could be how hard or soft that they push their pencil on the paper. So are they ripping up the paper because they're pushing so hard? Another example of motor planning could be, just do they have that pencil control, or are they undershooting or overshooting during handwriting, and therefore their letters are sinking below the line or above the line. So that pencil control piece, as well as physical skills of proprioception. So knowing where their body is in space. Again, it goes back to that sitting posture, as well as visual skills for letter formation, line placement, pencil control, size, and spacing. So you can see all of those kind of underlying skills before we even are writing sentences. We have to have this big chunk of skills. And then the next piece is that cognitive. So now the child can also have that foundational skill of grammar, phonological skills, spelling, attention, syntax, and executive functions. So those higher level organizational skills, the higher level visual attention, in order to get their thoughts out onto paper. So you can see that these are a little bit higher level than maybe that that physical piece, that visual piece, because we're so now we're combining. We've got the physical, the visual, and the cognitive. We've got the strong, solid foundation, so that the next piece is fluency. So the child has the ability to transfer their thoughts onto paper in a way that is effective and efficient, which means fluency. So we want writing to eventually become an automatic thing, so that they don't have to think about how to write, but they can think about what to write. And that's the beauty of this approach, is now they're finally able to get their thoughts on paper, which is the top of the pyramid, independence. They can receive appropriate and individualized remediation and accommodations. So the accommodations will be used throughout this entire pyramid. And that's really important too, because we're not just saying, we're going to remediate them, they're going to be fine. Dysgraphia, they don't have any more. You're always going to have dysgraphia, just like dyslexia. It will never go away, but we can remediate, we can accommodate, and we can modify for the child, so that the child is then able to participate and perform writing tasks with tools independently. And that's kind of our goal. And that's what, as parents and as educators, that's really what we're aiming for. But you can see just how important those foundational skills is. So I think I really tend to hone in on that foundation approach and building up that strong. And a lot of times when I get kids that and clients that come to me, and maybe they are 4th or 5th grade, and maybe the parent is thinking that we're going to be writing sentences, and I might say, give me like 2 months, and but we're going to back it all the way up to, we might even have to go all the way back to pre-reading skills, but definitely individual letter formations and all of that, and then building up from them. So hopefully those two graphics kind of have given you a bit of a framework, so that you can think about dysgraphia and kind of know the overview of that. So just some quick, easy tips and strategies that I want you all to leave with as well are so adapting them. So that's that accommodations piece. So we can easily adapt the environment for these kids with simple low-tech tools, such as changing the pencil that they're using, changing the pencil grip, adding a different grip. Some of my clients have added weighted grips. So one client in particular has an essential primer. So having that weight helps him stabilize his hand. Another client, I introduced a grip because she has decreased muscle tone. And she was just having a really hard time even holding a pencil or crayon. And so we're building up all of those underlying skills. But once I introduced a pencil, we adapted a grip that traditionally you wouldn't even, actually, I had her tutor ask me, hold on, I've never seen the grip used that way before. And I'm like, that's because we're being creative here in this work. So we can change the paper as well. So there's tons of different lines options, raised lines, wider, narrower. Handwriting Without Tears that we mentioned earlier has a specific double line. So changing for the student and then changing the placement. So maybe the placement, you kind of tilt it at a certain angle depending on if they're right-handed or left-handed. You can use slant boards. You can put the paper on the wall. You can put the paper on the floor and they lie on their belly. So all of that piece as well. Again, I could talk for hours about that, adapting the environment, but just the key here is you can, and that those are super easy fixes. Building those foundational skills, as I hit on earlier, those are just vital to all of this. Increasing accessibility using those like low-tech and cool. And that's a future webinar that Penny and I can pull together some resources for low-tech and high-tech tools, because there are a lot out there, and I think a lot of people don't realize. And I think it's easy to get overwhelmed with the tools. And I think it's also really important to know that, again, a one-size-fits-all doesn't work for these tools. So being able to individualize it to each student is very important. And that leads me to, individualizing and really meeting the child where they are. So, they are maybe in that 4th grade, and this is the first time they are getting help for this dysgraphia piece, or the first time people are even aware that they might have something going on. They're probably at the point where they're pretty frustrated. They probably aren't liking writing. So we're going to meet them where they're at. We're not going to force them to write an essay. We're going to make it fun. We're going to find their interests and keep them engaged. I know also sometimes families can feel unsure about, like, how do you do handwriting virtually? And the key is I say it looks pretty much identical to in person, because we are using tools. It's not on the screen. We are using the exact same tools that we would be using in person, engaging that child, making it fun. And then they can see the progress too, because including them in the progress and the goals and making them a part of the team is just really, really important and vital. All right, so I know that was a super fast overview of dysgraphia. And again, I think the important thing here is that I think now you have a bit of a knowledge, and you know what to look for, and you know kind of where to start, which I think is really important, especially if you do have a newer diagnosis. And so I'm happy to open it up for questions, and happy to answer anything. And I'll also say that before we end this call, if anyone is interested in learning more about what we offer at Handwriting Solutions, as well as know that we have a ton of free resources on our website. We have a blog, as well as just some free webinars and extras and bonuses on there too. So feel free to go to handwritingsolutions.org to learn more there. And then I'm opening up to anyone who's listening a free 15-minute consultation where we can dive in a little bit deeper with your child or student and
Thank you. That was so great. I really appreciate all the information, Kelli. I'm an OT as well as you are, and I've worked with Handwriting Without Tears, but even with my experience, I definitely had some takeaways, and I loved your model explaining kind of that foundational piece. And I think that is so important. And you spoke about, a fourth or fifth grader. I worked in the schools years ago, and I noticed my high school students, I did a lot of handwriting with as well. And just, knowing if your child's older, they certainly can benefit from structured handwriting instruction as well. Kelli, do you have experience to speak of working with children that might be a little older?
Absolutely. I'm so glad you brought that up because I see time and again, like I said, on some of these Facebook groups, and they're like, the kid's in fifth grade. Oh, well, he's pretty much where no, it's never too late. I think what I think about is think about maybe an older individual who might have a brain injury. Are we going to not remediate their writing if that's important for them too?
Exactly.
We will, and they will improve. So I think we have to think about it that our brains are plastic. So we can always improve. We can always grow, and our writing can always be better with that explicit and systematic approach. So I definitely have experience with working with that middle school age, especially those kids that maybe the school system has just thrown up their hands and said, well, it is what it is. And we've made some amazing gains. I try to always share too, if anybody's interested, on my social media, Handwriting Solutions, Facebook and Instagram, some before and after results, because I think that speaks volumes. And I try to put the students' grade as well, just so that you can see like, it is possible to make gains later.
I think I got the chat going. And so I'm just typing in those URLs that you put in here so they can grab them and copy and paste them. So far, we don't have any questions in the Q&A. If you have any, drop them in there, but that's certainly okay. Sometimes it just takes a little bit to absorb everything.
Yeah.
And just know that Kelli and I are available. If you would like to watch more of these webinars, you can always reach out to Kelli. I know she does some on her through Handwriting Solutions. I also do weekly webinars through the Dyslexia RX community, and you can check us out there. Let's go ahead. Yes, Kelli, thank you for putting that in there.
Yep, absolutely. So I put in my Calendly link, which is just the easiest way to book that 15-minute consultation. And it's a no pressure phone call. I truly just want to be able to help these parents and the teachers. And I understand where you are because I've been there. And honestly, I'm still living it. So my daughter's in fourth grade now. And, there are times I shake my head. I'm like, like if we worked on pencil grasp a lot, and it's pretty comical how I cringe at her grasp, but is it functional?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Well, is she getting her thoughts out on paper? Yes, she is. So we're there.
Exactly. Well, Kelli, we really appreciate all that you've shared with us. Again, if you have any questions, you can reach out to us on our websites. We're happy to answer. Follow us on social media, handwriting at Handwriting Solutions and at Dyslexia RX on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, any others. I know I'm on YouTube. Kelli, are you on YouTube?
I am, but I'm not.
But
goals, that's my goal this year.
Okay. And this is being recorded. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording, but I do want to let all of you know that we are going to put